Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Centering on Peace. My name is John Hoskins Aberhall. And with me to celebrate Earth Day are people not from Berks County, but they've come all the way from Lebanon County, and they've brought with them a great amount of wonderful props, and they're going to tell us about it. And my guests are, first of all, Joelle and Litz of Citizens Coordinating
for Clean Water.
And I want to thank you for coming. Joelle, and I know, has a list of credits as long as your arm, and it's very impressive. So, Joelle, perhaps you could tell us some of the many things that you have done in Lebanon County.
Well, to begin with, I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Lebanon County, and many years ago we received a water quality grant from the National League to do a water quality study, and so began the process of my education in the water line. But I met up with a group of very educated and dedicated people, among them Frank Meiser, who's with me tonight. He used to run the Greater Lebanon Refuse Authority, and he has a wealth of knowledge in his brain that I get to pick all the time. We have a city councilwoman who was the head of the water department. We have a doctorate type person whose field is microbiology. We have a retired science teacher, just all these people with a wealth of knowledge. And I'm not a professional anything. I'm a mother, I'm a housewife. I do happen to run a business that's a body shop, that's an auto body shop, and it's a little unusual, I know, for a woman, but my background just all came together, and I found my true love in the Swatara Watershed. It's a place where my grandfather used to take me swimming during the days, and at that time it was known as the Black Swati. And the creek over the years has really started to clean itself up, and that's some of the props we brought along to show how that's happening.
Well, I think one of the reasons why you call it the Black Swati.
Yes, sir.
And why is it black?
It was black because of all the extensive coal mining that was done in the northern regions, and in the past there were not good conservation measures used. And when that happened, the coal washed off and the dirt went down the Swatara Creek, and it was the Black Swati.
Just like Schuylkill here.
Just like the Schuylkill. An ironic thing is that our two watersheds, the Swatara Watershed and the Schuylkill River Watershed, both begin within less than a mile of each other in Schuylkill County. And the one map, what's wrong with this picture?
It's this map here on my right.
Is the one that shows you where our two watersheds do meet. You can see the dark line almost down the center.
This line here is where the two watersheds meet.
And about the middle there somewhere is where the mountain is, and the water drains down one side into the Schuylkill River and down the other side into the Swatara Watershed. And that, of course, the Swatara, anyhow, goes into the Susquehanna River, which, if you've heard, has been named one of the top threatened rivers.
I saw that in the paper today.
Yes, And then, of course, from the Susquehanna River, it flows into the Chesapeake Bay, which our governors have joined together to sign to try and clean up. So we have so much in common, and of course that commonness in the tributaries, in the headwaters to the Swatara Creek and the Schuylkill River, is the fact that there was a lot of coal mining in Schuylkill County's past. So we do have a lot in common.
While we have this map on the screen, could you explain briefly, because it's such an important concept for those people who don't know exactly what is meant by a watershed?
Yes.
What a watershed is, and perhaps why it's important.
Sure. Basically, my understanding of a watershed is that there is a high ridge surrounding.
This is the ridge here.
Basically, yes. Yeah. There's a high ridge, and from that ridge the water will drain down into the valley.
One side or the other.
One side or the other, and the drainage of each side becomes a watershed.
But that's not something that we're very conscious of in our society. I mean, we know where the river is, but I have no idea, until I saw this map, which doesn't show up all that well, but it's great live. But it's not a concept that people have. They don't live with it. This is the edge of the watershed. This is where I should.
Right. That's one of the educational things that we do try and bring across, that we aren't living just in our backyard, that we do understand that we share a common resource with so many of our neighbors. For instance, the Swatara Watershed covers 4 counties: Schuylkill County, portion of Berks County, around the Topahawken Creek area. It also goes into Lebanon and Dauphin County. So the Swatara Watershed is not just owned by any one county. Whatever one person does upstream affects what happens downstream.
Now, on this same map, there are, which maybe you can see, if Gary can zoom in a little bit, but there are lots and lots and lots of little yellow dots.
Yes,
Perhaps
sir.
you could tell us a little bit about what those little yellow dots are.
Okay, now
You know,
first,
they're all numbered 1 and
Yes.
so on. They're all sites of some kind or
yes,
other.
on that particular map, that was created by citizens of Schuylkill County. I must tell you the precursor to this
Yeah.
map, though. Quite some time ago, we understand that there was some sort of a consulting firm out in California that did a study, and they were looking for a good area to locate things like landfills and incinerators. Some of the criteria they used were to find some place that was sparsely populated, poorly educated, some place that maybe was degraded already, and they thought maybe the people wouldn't raise much of a fuss. They started looking, and in Schuylkill County they found not only abandoned coal mines but bankrupt lands in large quantities that appeared to be the ideal site. And adding to that, there was Interstate Route 81 that came into that area, an excellent infrastructure. And they took advantage of that, and they started coming in and promising all sorts of things to the people in Schuylkill County. But ironically, the people in Schuylkill County, and of course we were there too, rose up and said, how dare you come in and more or less bargain off our future? We have already undergone so much degradation in this area by means of the coal mines in the past. Many of those coal mines are now closed, but
And these yellow dots?
the yellow dots, to finish the story, are the sites. At that time, there were 19 of them, incinerators, landfills, that sort of thing, that wanted to locate in this targeted Schuylkill County. At one time, we understand the sites rose to 22 in number. Some of them have been defeated. Some of them are caught up in litigation in the courts. We've testified. I'm trying to think how many nights we sat there in Schuylkill County just for the Browning Ferris Industry Landfill. 19. Thank you, Frank. And this was a zoning board hearing. I don't know how you handle your zoning here in Berks County, but if you have a zoning board hearing, normally it's over in an hour maybe, or a couple of minutes sometimes, and this went on 19 nights. The tens of thousands of dollars that were spent, I can just imagine lawyers on both sides, professional witnesses on both sides canceling each other out. And in the long run, what happened was the local people were the ones with the common sense that prevailed, in my opinion. There was one lady who sat on her porch, had all the time in the world. She counted the traffic as it went by. And sure enough, she had credibility because the people in that room knew her. And her figures were accurate. She had times and everything else. And so what the professional witnesses showed, she just contradicted. It was just fascinating to watch the whole process.
Really to encourage people to get involved, like the woman who stood on her porch. I think we all have a role to play if we're willing to play.
That's right. It doesn't matter how small the effort is that you make. The fact is that you do something. Could leave here tonight with just one little impression that hopefully I can leave on people. If you want to do something lasting for this earth, you mentioned the deforestation, go out and plant a tree. That tree will last much longer than your lifetime most likely, and will do something good for your children. When did we form? In 1988.
1988, so you've been going 4 years.
Yes.
5 years.
Yeah.
And when you testify at hearings, and you also do public displays, and we've got a huge array of stuff on our left.
We have talked to probably, I kind of lost count, but it's somewhere around 75 groups and organizations, including schools, civic organizations, chambers of commerce. We've gone to the Scenic Rivers Task Force. We've gone to, in fact, the county commissioners of Berks County who have endorsed our project. In Dauphin County and Lebanon County, yes, we've been very well received wherever we go. And we're just thankful for that support.
Right. So when you go to some place, where do you start with your story?
Well, may I go to the... This happens to be a vial from the Exxon Valdez spill. And this vial contains some oil that's floating around in there. Perhaps it's not real visible on television, but it reminds me to talk to people about the fact that the Swatara Creek can become contaminated with perhaps an oil spill. An oil spill can close down our water supply system. And in fact, there was one many years ago, around the 1970s, I believe. And we had to shut down our water supply because we could no longer take water from the Swatara Creek. The oil smells and makes a mess. And I just brought it along because it reminds me to tell you about that.
Right.
The next form of
Can I just ask
Yes.
you about this? It's the source of drinking water for a lot of people?
Oh, heavens, yes. The Swatara Creek provides water for Pine Grove. It provides water for Lebanon County. The Pennsylvania American Water Company in Hershey draws from the Swatara Creek, as does Hummeltown and Middletown's different at times. So what happens is water is the most recycled commodity on earth. They pick it up in the Pine Grove area, and it runs through their pipes and into their sewage system and gets processed and put back into the Swatara Creek. A few miles downstream, we pick it up, run it through our system, and then treat it and discharge it back into the water, and so on down the line. On the Swatara Creek alone, that water can get recycled 5 times. It's just phenomenal.
And how long a river is it? Or
Roughly 60 miles, Frank?
Yeah.
Around that. I don't know the
and it gets
exact number.
recycled 5 times.
Yeah.
So it's imperative, obviously, to keep the water clean. I mean,
Yes.
that's lesson number 1.
Right. And again, as I mentioned, in Schuylkill County, we do share the beginnings of our water supplies. One of the things up there is a lot of abandoned coal mines. And this vial Frank personally collected from one of the discharges that was polluting the Swatara watershed. And what you will see here is mine acid drainage. And this is how it would come out of a pipe and just start going down into our stream. It's pretty nasty looking stuff, isn't it?
And do we know the contents of it? It's heavy metals of some kind.
Heavy metals.
Mostly iron.
Mostly.
That's right. So here you have another pollution source in acid mine drainage.
And how do you stop the mines from draining?
Well, there is a very good way. One of the ways is when you have these abandoned mines, you can backfill them and reseed them. And when you do that, you start planting roots in the ground that hold the dirt and the coal from washing off into your stream. So that's one of the ways that they do it. Another way for the active miners to clean up the area is to use a series of silt collection ponds. They might have a series of 3 ponds, like stepping stones almost. And as the water flows through them, it starts to settle. The dirt, this acid mine drainage starts to settle. And of course it collects and builds up, and after a while they can dredge that out. And it's much better than just letting it run straight off into the stream.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and another source of pollution that you will find in the Swatara watershed, and I would assume in your watershed as well, I brought along my little cow. What happens?
That's tough to see, but
That's
it is
tough to see. It's a
toy
little
cow.
moo cow. Because we have a lot of farms in our area, and what happens is if the cows are constantly watering along the Swatara Creek, and they're going along an entire bank, say a mile bank, all along that bank they're stepping down the dirt, and it's just eroding and washing off into the creek. So what we found is that the recommendation is that you leave one of 2 things: a riparian stream bank and keep the cows back a couple of feet, or you can do a stream fencing program, and there are subsidies to help the farmers do this. They will put a fence along their stream and just have a single watering point, and that helps protect the rest of the bank. And it's a very nice program, but we do have a lot of agriculture. Some of it is from the cows, some of it is also from chemicals, over polluting with chemicals that can wash off into your creek.
And where does the Swatara wind up?
It goes from the Swatara to the Susquehanna River to the Chesapeake Bay.
And the Chesapeake Bay, as we all know, is...
In dire need of cleanup, yes.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so now you've kind of seen the pollution sources, but the next part of our program would tell you about how to clean up the water naturally, how Mother Nature, in fact, cleans up the water. All of these things are happening in the northern reaches of our watershed, and if we have, limestone is soluble, and this is high calcium limestone. If you would take and drop this water, this dirty water, this polluted water onto the high calcium limestone, it starts to flock out the heavy metals and clean up the water supply. From there, ideally, you could direct the water through a set of swamps, or whatever you would like to call them, wetlands. There's so many names applied to them over the years. And in those wetlands, hopefully you would find some cattails. And these cattails are terrific. Again, Frank collected these. He's a good resource man. And this is one of the systems he might be able to tell you about, that he started out at the Lebanon landfill to clean up any leachate that came off of the landfill. Leachate is rainwater that goes in and mixes with the garbage. On the stem here, he has some very good specimens. What you have is some heavy metal picked up by the cattail.
You can actually see it?
You can actually see it in the cattail. It literally picks up the heavy metals and soaks it into their stems, and that's how Mother Nature pulls it out of the water.
I'm talking tonight to Joel and Litz from Citizens Coordinating for Clean Water, based on the Swatara Creek in Lebanon County and elsewhere. And Joel, and you're in the midst of
Cleaning up this dirty water.
cleaning up dirty water, which is, I mean, it's amazing the similarities between the Schuylkill and the
Yes,
Swatara. I guess
absolutely.
not so amazing given their proximity, but please go ahead.
Okay, next, and now this happens to be a plastic plant, but it is a water lily. Water lilies, again, have a very good cleaning up capacity to make the water go back to a nice condition. And hopefully after it goes through this process of the high calcium limestone and the cattails and then the water lilies, what will happen is you will come out with a nice fresh glass of clean water that you can drink. So
Now-
it's really refreshing. I needed that.
The high calcium limestone that you have there, you dump that in massive quantities?
Large blocks. Now, one of the things that I did when I started early on was go to my local pet store, and I happened to pick up a test kit for water out of the fish aquariums. And in these test kits, you can test for pH and ammonia and nitrate and copper. So I started doing tests on the Swatara Creek to find out for myself if the water quality was picking up, and I had some very good results. After a rainstorm is when you have the worst pollution on the Swatara Creek, and probably also in the Schuylkill River. And the reason that is because of runoff. And if you ever look at a creek, right after a rain, it will be muddy. And I brought along some things to show you that what happens here on our earth happens mostly around the world when it rains. I brought with me tonight just a pot of dirt. It's just soil. And if you have a bare bank, what's going to happen if it rains, I'm going to be a rainmaker now, and I pour water across that soil just so, it's
You mean
going
if the cows have been tramping it
the
down?
cow's
for
been
example?
tramping it, or deforestation, for whatever reason that you have bare soil, what is going to happen is that water is going to go through the soil. And remember, I'm just pouring this very lightly. We've had some torrential rains here of late, and the soil literally goes off into the water. And in fact, more than half of the pollution in any river is from sediment. And of course, that's one of the biggest problems in the Chesapeake Bay area. So next, what I thought I'd do is show you. Now, my grass has been through a lot sitting in the car, but I had potted some grass. And if you have an area that is planted with grass and or trees, you develop roots in the soil. And of course, if I would pour some water across this same area, what happens is, yes, the water will run off, but you will notice that the water does not get very much more cloudy. It has a good way to retain the soil, a natural way, again, to retain that soil, and also to help the river stay cleaner. Next, what you see is my decomposing lunch from about 4 weeks ago. There's a
Nice.
banana peel in there. There's a smashed aluminum can, a peanut butter cup paper, and by the way, I changed my VCR battery that day, just to let you know what I did on one particular afternoon. So what this is representing is a landfill, okay? Now what we're going to have happen here is rain is going to go onto the landfill. And if you remember correctly, I told you rainwater mixing with garbage is called leachate. Now leachate can be clear. It doesn't have to be poisonous, but it can be. It can pick up cadmium and lead and all kinds of things out of articles inside the landfill. I mean, battery acid, those kinds of things. And it's going to drain into the water. And in the beginning, I would have drank this water. Would you drink it now? It keeps getting worse and worse. We're degrading the water. This is people, businesses, and in some cases government not taking care of our environment. Well, I have one more thing. We talked a lot about coal mines. This particular one is a coal mine up there in Schuylkill County, and it's going to rain on that coal mine now. And the water's going to wash around a little bit. And then, of course, it's going to run off into the Swati. And again, now I've washed this coal many, many times, so hopefully it's getting a little cleaner. But in the beginning, this water would turn pure black. And as that washes off, and all that sediment runs into the water, you can see that it gets dirtier and dirtier and dirtier.
Now, it wasn't immediately obvious, as I remember vaguely, to people that a good way to clean coal was to wash it in the river. It was somebody had a bright idea
Yeah,
in the
wash
last
the
century.
coal, and of course people downstream paid the price. Vegetation and of course your aquatic animals, the fish in a river are like the canaries in a coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
And of course if they start turning belly up, that's one thing that you can watch for that would be negative in your area. Another thing that I've been told by Joe Kosak, he now works for the Fish Commission, I think he's their public relations person. He told me that if you have a catfish in that stream, that they're very low on the DNA scale. When those catfish start developing tumors, that's showing long-term pollution. So if you start fishing and pulling catfish out of the river with tumor after tumor on them, you have got a very bad piece of polluted water.
Funny you should say that. We happen to have catfish with tumors, I understand, in Lake Ontoloni.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And,
one of the problems that can happen with long-term pollution that doesn't go through this cleaning up process. Now, again, on the Swatara Creek, we are getting it cleaned up through some natural reclamation, and over the years it is improving significantly. In fact, so much that we have gotten it upgraded to 1A on the Scenic Rivers program in Pennsylvania. We're very proud of that accomplishment. And in addition, some of the natural reclamation, of course, is aided by man. The sewage treatment plants through Penvest are getting upgraded. And in fact, man can also clean up this dirty water. They don't have to run it through man-made things, which we think is the most economical. They can run it through filters. Now, I have a simple paper filter here from my body shop. It normally strains paint. And hopefully you can see it's clearer just by running it through a simple paper filter. Well, now at the Water Authority in Lebanon County, what they will do is run it through some coal on the top, or charcoal, to help clean it up. I think it's regular coal. In fact, it's anthracite coal now that I'm thinking about it. So coal can clean up water as well as degrade it. And of course there's a big pit of sand below that, and it filters out the impurities, as well as then they add chlorine so that it doesn't turn green, it grow algae in the pipes and things like that. It kind of kills the algae. So that's one way man can clean up water. But again, this is an expensive process. The other process is natural and very inexpensive. Volunteering is so important. Frank and I do not get paid for what we do. None of our members do. We are all volunteers.
What are these three posters in back of it?
Oh, sure. This first one, Think Globally, Act Locally, is of course a national, if not international, symbol of how we should look at the earth. Again, we in the Swatara Watershed are at least looking at a 4-county area. And in fact, I was invited to attend the Global Assembly of Women in the Environment in 1991. And when we were there, the reason I found out that we were called to come was because we had a watershed concept, which we didn't know was a new idea at the time, or relatively in its infancy. But because we were not just looking in our backyard, but kind of stepping back and looking at the big picture, this caught their attention, and we presented the Swatara Creek story at this Global Assembly of Women in the Environment. And ironically, at that gathering of women from all around the world, they used actually 4 themes. It was waste, water, energy, and environmental friendly systems. Well, I found this concept so fascinating that I incorporated it into our presentations. Of course, we talked about the landfills trying to locate too close together in such a cluster that it could permanently degrade our water, and to the point where we would have to pick up and move and leave our area. We talked about water getting purified, getting degraded. And then also, the other thing, believe it or not, we did talk about tonight was energy, and that was in the form of coal. Coal can get burned to produce electricity. We can also have nuclear power, there's wind power, solar power, there's all kinds of energy. So what we try to get people doing is thinking that this is a cycle, wastewater energy, wastewater energy. If you don't think of these terms as interrelating, and I don't know how many millions of gallons a day a nuclear power plant consumes in clean water, or actually water from the Swatara Creek, taking TMI for an example. Just millions of gallons of water evaporate into the sky. So as they draw this water out, they must apply to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission to get a permit to take and use all that water. And of course, when you have a landfill, you have the leachate coming off. There's water there. If you have dusty roads, you have to wet them down so the dust isn't flying and the neighbors aren't complaining. There's water involved in a landfill. It is a cycle. We are part of that cycle. So for our future, we do have to work together. Businesses, people, and government. What happens is if you have a business that's polluting the environment and the people get angry, they're going to rise up and probably report it to their elected officials, and the elected officials are going to in turn turn around and impose legislation and come back and impose that on business. And of course, then if a business gets shut down, the people can lose their jobs. Again, we have this vicious cycle. We have to work together. We have to be able to say, okay, I am in business. Government regulation is necessary because there are people who do not think about these things, but there are good companies out there who are realizing it can become financially good to be conscientious about the earth. 3M took some of their leftover products and turned it into a profitable situation, probably mostly because of employees making suggestions on how to recycle the products. So recycling and reusing and reducing the consumption of these products is very helpful. One kind of example that comes to mind is that there were leftover plastic pellets just laying around, and they were trying to decide what they could do with these. And I think there were aviation airplanes that would need repainting from time to time, but they had to strip off the old paint. And when they sandblasted it, the sand went through the thin aluminum, and of course maybe even took rubber off of the wires on the inside of the shell. So they ended up with holey airplanes and bad wiring. And if they used chemical strippers, the paint strippers, it was dripping onto the ground and oozing and getting into the water supply. That's not very safe either. So finally what they did was recycle these little plastic pellets they had laying around, and they shot those onto the airplanes, and it safely took off the paint without going through the aluminum and without dropping all the chemicals onto the ground.
Absolutely fascinating, you know, because it's a great example of once you have the right mindset,
Yes.
once you're thinking in that way, in that interconnected way, then human ingenuity can do it, but you have to make the first step of thinking that way. Otherwise, you know, we're really so ignorant, we behave like a species that's not very smart.
Yeah. If I may, another example comes to mind, being in the automobile repair business, is that I have recycled metal bumpers, whether it be aluminum or steel, and the radiators and the air conditioning condensers. There's coppers and there's aluminums and all sorts of recyclable metals there, and the fenders themselves are steel. All of these we have been recycling before it was vogue. I mean, actually a body shop is a recycling shop to some degree. The one thing in recent years that we really had trouble getting rid of, and in fact my insurance man came in and told me I had to dispose of it because it became a fire hazard, was the plastics. Plastic bumpers, plastic grills, you know, all these things started coming out in automobiles, and what happened was there was so many different kinds of plastic. One person could not come in, or one recycler could not come in, pick up my pile of plastic, take it back and recycle it. Well, I read the trade magazines, and finally I think it's the big three are getting together, and they're going to agree on a certain type of plastic to use. They're going to start all using the same. So from now on, I will not have 300 plastic bumpers laying on a pile waiting for somebody to figure out how to recycle them. In the future, in the very near future, I do believe they're going to be able to come in and pick it up in one lump sum. Just another note on the paint line, they're trying to go to a water-soluble paint, so soon you'll be able to watercolor your car.
I'm wondering whether there are any other lessons that you think that the Swatara people can teach us that we ought to be thinking about.
Well, I think we can all teach each other. Actually, we were invited into an organization called Hershey Trust, and they, of course, run the Milton Hershey schools. It's in the area of Hershey where they make the chocolate bars. And I feel so good that we were able to plant a seed in that we were working towards upgrading the scenic river status of the Swatara Creek. They looked at our materials, and of course, many years later, they finally completed their own study and found something like 20 Indian sites along the Swatara Creek, just in their 9-mile stretch. We have Indian echo caverns along the Swatara Creek. It's a magnificent geological underground cavern that the public can go and tour. We have fossil sites further north on the Swatara Creek that have 500 million year old specimens, and you can go out as a Sunday school class or a school class, or just somebody who's interested, and you can actually dig up fossils with little bugs and shells and worms and things like that embedded in it. We have so many wonderful things. We have an antique 21-ton historic steam engine that gives rides along the Swatara Creek. It's called the M&H, or Middletown to Hummelstown Railroad. All these things do combine together to make the scenic river what it is today. And of course, getting back to Hershey Trust, with the study that they've completed, it's my understanding they are now helping to fund a complete study of the entire Swatara Creek in Dauphin County. And at that point, they hope to establish a greenway along the Swatara Creek. And I feel real good about that, because I think we had in the beginning just a little part of planting that seed. Getting these areas cleaned up, the abandoned areas, getting them backfilled. We've had written and asked DER and also the national government to spend some of the mine reclamation funds that these miners are paying, and it's going who knows where. We asked them, bring some of those funds in and backfill these abandoned areas and plant them, reseed them. And in fact, it's happening right now. So we feel that this is a vehicle to meet our goal of cleaning up that Swatara Creek.
We're concentrating on clean water. I think finally water is becoming embedded in people's brains that this is really a big issue, and maybe the issue of environmental issue in the next 10, 20 years. Are we going to have a clean water supply?
At the Global Assembly of Women and the Environment that was held in Miami, Florida back in 1991, I did meet people from all around the world. It was one of the most fascinating experiences I know I'll ever have in my lifetime. I was able to talk to an Indian woman who told me that the Indians plan 7 generations ahead. So if we can adopt that thinking, I think that we'll do fine. And one of the other things she shared was that they hesitate to show the medicinal plants they use, because when we Americans catch hold of it, and not that they're not Americans, but say the mainstream Americans, we will go in and just totally wipe out that area. Well, they will just take a portion of the plant and allow it to grow and be there for the next person that needs to use it. They don't totally destroy things.
All of us, obviously, to take part, but why women in particular?
Well, Mustafa Tolba, if I said his name correctly, I don't want to do him injustice, is in charge of the environment program for the United Nations, and he directed his executive director to call together this global assembly simply because he realized that men were making all the decisions. This was a man saying this, not a woman, liberal type person. And he said, I want to find out what the women of the world think. After all, they gather the wood and the water in many countries. They are the educators of our children. They hold in their hands the power to change things and to put things on the right path. So he was very conscientious in asking the women of the world what they thought, and that's how we got together, and it was a precursor to the Rio Summit.
Well, I think that attitude that we all live downstream is vitally important. Joanne, thank you very much for coming from Lebanon County, for bringing all these wonderful props, and I hope many people in Berks County will take your example, become involved. Normal people doing great work, and I'm sure it's given you enormous satisfaction, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.